You ever notice how betrayal doesn't come with a bang? It's quiet, polite, smiles through its teeth and says, "Go ahead, have another drink." That's what that night was like. The gala was one of Diane's annual crown jewels, the spring forward benefit. Black ties, bad jazz, and rich people pretending to care about poor ones. My name was still on the venue plaque. I designed the damn event space back when I had a career, a spine, and a full head of hair. Now, I'm 63, retired, and the guy who holds coats at these things while his wife dances with donors. Diane had been glowing that night. Tight black gown, diamond studs, hair swept up like an old money princess who'd never heard of a recession. She kissed my cheek, told me her stomach was acting up, and she'd be slipping out early. I didn't even argue. That's how good she was at this game. She made it easy to trust her. It wasn't until I was over by the silent auction table, admiring a grotesquely large crystal bird bath, that I heard it. 2 board members, real estate wives, hair sprayed within an inch of their skulls, leaning in close. I swear I saw her, one of them whispered, with Vince. The lounge over at Deerfield. She looked fine to me. Vince Rourke, town council president. Married, smug, and shaped like a sausage in a tailored suit. I let the words sink in. Let them roll around inside me. Diane, sick. Diane, slipping out early. Diane, having drinks with Vince Rourke at a members-only lounge 20 minutes across town. I smiled. Not because I was calm. Because I was absolutely, stone-cold sure I'd just seen the first card fall. See, I don't do emotional breakdowns. I don't throw tantrums or cry in the driveway. I don't call friends and ask for advice over Chardonnay. What I do is sit, think, watch, and I file things away quietly, efficiently. When Diane got home that night, sometime around midnight, freshly showered, I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't even look up from my book. She said her stomach had eased up and she'd stopped by the office to pick up her laptop. Said she ran into a few folks at the Deerfield on the way back and waved hello. Waved. Hello. She even asked if I wanted tea. I said sure. 2 days later, I showed up at the charity's office with a fresh-pressed button-up and a box of old architectural journals, said I wanted to stay sharp in retirement by volunteering. Diane beamed like I brought her roses. Introduced me to her assistant, Maddie, some intern with chipped nail polish and a neck tattoo she kept covered with scarves, and gave me a tour like I'd never been there before. Which was cute, since I'd designed the damn place. I smiled, nodded, took the volunteer schedule and settled in. That's when the real fun began. Diane's organization, Foundation for Growth, brought in nearly $3 million in donor pledges last year. I remembered because I'd signed the taxes myself. What I didn't know until I started sorting files was that a surprising number of those pledges came as untraceable cash gifts. They were marked as event donations or private thank yous. But no receipts. No ledger trails. Just scanned forms with someone's initials and a dollar amount written like a drug deal. Veer showed up on 3. Cash. 17 grand. Split over 5 months. Curious. Maddie, bless her tattooed little heart, was terrible at hiding passwords. One afternoon she left the office to get coffee and I slid onto her computer. 10 seconds and a sticky note later, I was inside Diane's correspondence folder. Nothing steamy. No dirty emails. Just logistics. Calendars. An unusually high number of late dinners scheduled off-site with Vince Rourke. Mostly after city planning meetings. Sometimes after zoning board votes. It didn't take long to connect the dots. The affair? That was predictable. Tacky, even. But the bribery? That was art. Diane wasn't just cheating. She was facilitating under-the-table real estate deals. Fast-tracking permits. Steering city resources to developers through her influence on the charity board. Vince provided the leverage. She provided the smile. And the charity? That was the laundering machine. I didn't confront her. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I started building. A story, not a structure. I contacted an old friend, Miles Bannister. Retired journalist. Used to cover city corruption for the Chronicle before they went full lifestyle fluff. I told him I had something that might put his name back on the map. I didn't give him everything, just enough to pique his blood. Photos. Scans. A couple receipts I'd lifted from Maddie's drawer. Who's your source? He asked. Call me Mr. Concrete, I said. He laughed. And then he got to work. Meanwhile, Diane was preparing for the biggest night of her year. The spring auction. Press. Politicians. Donors. Her name engraved on the evening's keynote plaque. She asked if I'd mind sitting front row this year. Said it would mean a lot. Of course, I told her. Wouldn't miss it. The night before the gala, Miles called me. It's ready, he said. Print, digital, podcast. Goes live at noon tomorrow. You sure about the timing? I checked my watch. Perfect, I said. She gives her speech at 12:30. The next morning, I ironed my tux, polished my shoes, and drove Diane to the venue in our vintage Mercedes. She was radiant, buzzing with excitement. Kissed me on the cheek and said, "You've always been my rock." I smiled. That's me, I said. Hard to crack. The gala began like every other, faux sincerity and overcooked chicken. The guests sipped wine. The string quartet played. Diane mingled with senators and foundation royalty. I kept my phone in my pocket, waiting for the moment. At 12:04 p.m., phones began buzzing. At 12:07, I watched as Diane's smile faltered. At 12:11, her assistant Maddie walked over, pale as paste, and whispered something in her ear. And at 12:12, Diane's hand began to shake. I kept sipping my champagne. She took the stage anyway, tried to stammer through her speech. Something about transparency, about ethical leadership. But her voice cracked, her words stumbled. People were checking their phones now, full-blown. Murmurs spread. The Chronicle headline was everywhere. Zoning for sale. How beloved charity became a bribery vehicle for power players. Subheading, President Diane Callahan tied to secret donations and off-books permits. Full story inside. By 12:28, half the room had left. By 12:35, 2 city officials were quietly ushered out the back. By 12:40, it was time for the final item of the silent auction, Diane's late grandmother's heirloom necklace. The centerpiece of the night. I raised my number, and I outbid every single one of them. $42,000. Paid in full. Smiling the entire time. Diane stood there, pale, shaking, silent. And when the auctioneer handed me the necklace, I turned to the woman beside her, the new board member, her quiet little protege from the finance committee, and fastened the necklace around her throat. You'll wear it better, I said. And you won't sell the city for a weekend fling. Diane didn't cry. That would have made it too easy. She just stood there, her whole world bleeding out in front of her. And I never felt more alive. It's funny how quiet the house gets when a woman like Diane loses her mask. The night after the gala, she didn't come home. No call. No text. Not a damn thing. I sat in my chair by the window, bourbon in one hand, her untouched place setting still on the dining table across from mine. The silence wasn't sad. It was thick, dense. The kind of silence you only get after a bomb goes off and there's nothing left to burn. I watched headlights sweep past the window every few minutes, cars leaving the neighboring estate party. None of them stopped here. Around 1 in the morning, I finally killed the lights and went upstairs. Didn't lock the door. Didn't need to. She wouldn't be walking through it tonight. The next morning, I rose at 6, like always. Showered, shaved, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit. Routine matters in times like these. They remind you that you still control the clock, even when the rest of the world thinks it stopped ticking. I poured coffee. Black. No cream. No sugar. Sat at the kitchen island and waited. At 7:16 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Callahan. A voice said, low, male, clipped. You should be aware, there's been chatter this morning. Diane's attorney may reach out. I smiled. Miles always did love playing deep throat when he had the chance. Good, I said. Means they're scared. More than scared, he replied. Rourke's team is scrambling. Word is the council's ethics committee is meeting in emergency session. Excellent. Want me to keep pushing it? Not yet. Let them cook. We hung up. At 8:03, I heard the garage door open. I didn't move. Just kept sipping my coffee. Diane came in through the mudroom, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, lips pressed thin. Her heels clicked a frantic staccato against the tile. When she saw me sitting there, she stopped cold. You're up early, she said. I looked at her, really looked. The perfect hair was frazzled. Foundation couldn't quite hide the sallow tones creeping beneath her skin. The carefully constructed queen of the gala now looked like a woman who'd been fed to wolves and barely crawled back out. I always am, I said. She took off her sunglasses, tossed them on the counter, ran a hand through her hair. I need to explain, she started. I raised a hand. Just once. Calm. Smooth. The way you'd signal a dog to stay. Don't, I said. You'll only embarrass yourself further. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. The color drained from her face. You think this was just about an affair? I asked, voice low, precise. Diane, I stopped caring about your bed partners years ago. But you sold this city. You sold your charity. You sold your reputation for a few greasy zoning deals and a mediocre romp with Vince Rourke. She flinched at that. Good. I didn't. You did. And now everyone knows. She leaned against the counter, fingers trembling. I let the silence stretch, let her squirm in it. I don't know what you think you've done, she finally said. But this will blow over. I'll issue a statement. The board will circle the wagons. We've survived worse scandals. I laughed. Loud. Sharp. The kind of laugh that cuts a room in half. No, Diane. You won't survive this one. I stood. Smoothed my cuffs. Took a slow step toward her. By noon, the Chronicle will release follow-ups with deeper details. The council will be voting on Rourke's suspension. And the IRS. I leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. They're opening an audit. The agents will be here by Friday. She gasped. A sound halfway between shock and a strangled sob. How she choked out. How do you know? I smiled. Because, darling, I'm the one who gave them the breadcrumbs. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the island. Why? She whispered. You loved me. You said you'd always protect me. I stared down at her, cold as the marble beneath my feet. I did love you, I said. Once. Before you became this. And now? Now I'll protect what matters, my name, my legacy, this city from you. She sank to the floor, sobbing now. I didn't move to help her. Just watched. After a few moments, she looked up through tear-streaked lashes. Please, she begged. Tell them you were wrong. Retract it. I'll leave the charity. I'll disappear. I knelt. I level with her now. My voice dropped to a razor-thin whisper. No, Diane. You don't get to disappear. You get to linger. In every headline. Every whispered conversation at every country club. Every canceled donor check. You get to watch your empire crumble piece by piece, knowing exactly who pushed the first brick. I stood. Straightened my tie. Now, clean yourself up. The IRS doesn't like tears on the paperwork. I walked out. The next few days unfolded like clockwork. First, the council suspended Rourke pending investigation. The media circus devoured him. His smug face plastered across every screen with corruption in bold beneath it. Then came the charity board meeting. Diane arrived, pale and trembling, flanked by her attorney. The boardroom was packed, silent, grim. I sat in the back, a ghost at the feast. When they called the vote, no one spoke in her defense. Not one. The motion to remove her passed unanimously. She left in tears. Cameras caught every second. But I wasn't done. That evening, I called an old friend at the State Bar Association. Look into Rourke's side deals, I suggested. And maybe check Diane's interactions with city attorneys. By the next week, a formal ethics complaint was filed. Disbarment proceedings began for one of Rourke's closest allies. Diane called me twice. Left messages I never answered. On the third attempt, she tried in person. I was pruning the roses when I heard her car pull up. She approached, voice ragged. Please, she begged. We can fix this. We can move somewhere else. Start over. I snipped a dead bloom. Let the petals fall between us. No, Diane, I said. You'll stay right here. And you'll watch it all fall apart. That's the only justice that matters now. She sobbed, pleaded, dropped to her knees on the gravel path. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just turned, walked back inside, and locked the door. Let her howl at the empty sky. I've always believed in precision. It's what made me a damn good architect for 40 years. Every line, every angle, nothing left to chance. You start with a foundation, pour it right, level it, let it cure. Then you build. Strong. True. One deliberate layer at a time. Revenge works the same way. Most men, when they learn their wife's been sleeping with the town council president for 6 months and laundering dirty zoning money through her charity, would lose their heads. Scream. Throw things. Rage at the walls. It's human. It's weak. I'm not most men. When I first heard those whispers at the gala, Diane and Vince having drinks at the Deerfield, I didn't panic. I plotted. And now, with the board voting her out, the press circling, and the IRS digging through her finances like raccoons in a trash heap, the framework was in place. But the structure wasn't finished. Not yet. See, Diane's pride was the one piece still standing. The woman had built an entire identity out of civic sainthood. Lady of the town, they called her. The woman who saved the library wing. Who restored the old town hall clock. who hosted annual fundraisers in flowing gowns while the mayor shook her hand for the cameras. She thought she could weather the storm. Spin it. Issue tearful apologies. Blame the toxic influence of Vince Rourke. Play the victim. Crawl back into society's good graces. I couldn't allow that. And so, I began the next phase. It started with the donors. I called in favors. Quiet ones. See, when you design half the public buildings in a town over the course of 4 decades, you learn which strings to pull. I reached out to old clients, retired bankers, family friends who sat on the boards of the trust funds that fed Diane's charity pipeline. Each call was polite. Casual. I hear you've seen the news, I'd say. Of course, none of us wants to act rashly. But if I may suggest, it might be wise to delay any new pledges until this matter is resolved. No sense getting your name tangled up in scandal. Every single one agreed. Within 48 hours, incoming donations dried up like a puddle in the Nevada sun. Next, the awards committee. Diane had been scheduled to receive the Town Legacy Medal in 2 months, a glittering little accolade handed out at the mayor's summer gala. Big crowd. Press coverage. Redemption narrative ready-made. I made sure that didn't happen. A lunch meeting here. A quiet envelope of documents slipped to the committee chair there. Photos. Email excerpts. Notes on the IRS inquiry. All meticulously curated. By week's end, the committee postponed the award indefinitely. The press picked that up too. Another headline. Another blow. Meanwhile, the IRS investigation gained teeth. Miles kept me updated. Agents subpoenaed Diane's charity records, demanded a full audit. The whispers grew louder. At home, the silence was complete. Diane had retreated to the guest room. Her once cheerful, over-decorated bedroom now stood cold and dark. She moved like a ghost through the halls. Gone were the crisp pantsuits and designer heels. Now it was old sweaters and house shoes, hair knotted hastily on her head. She stopped wearing her wedding ring. I hadn't worn mine in years. One evening, as I read by the fireplace, she approached. Thin, pale, eyes rimmed red from another day of crisis calls and lawyer meetings. I know what you're doing, she said quietly. I looked up, marked my page with deliberate care. Do you? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. You're poisoning everything. The donors. The awards. The press. You won't stop until there's nothing left of me. I set the book aside. That's correct, I said simply. Tears welled in her eyes. Why? She whispered. You could have just divorced me. Walked away. Why destroy me? I stood. Moved to the bar. Poured 2 fingers of bourbon. Took a slow sip. You destroyed yourself, Diane, I said. I'm merely ensuring the wreckage is complete. She sobbed in her real, raw sobs. The kind that rattle the ribs. The kind that strip away the last shreds of dignity. I watched impassively. When this is over, I said, you'll remember something very clearly. You'll remember that I gave you a perfect life. A beautiful home. A spotless name. And you traded it all for zoning favors and the company of a man who couldn't outthink a doorknob. I downed the bourbon, set the glass on the counter. And I will not rest, I added, voice cold as the glass, until you wear that choice like a scar the rest of your days. She fled the room. I didn't follow. Instead, I prepared for the final phase. Vince Rourke was already bleeding politically. The ethics committee had issued a formal censure. His wife had filed for separation. The city's development projects were stalled under a cloud of suspicion. But the real coup de grace would come through the state AG's office. Again, I called in a favor. An old law school friend now worked as a senior investigator. I provided him with a neat dossier, clean, professional, impossible to ignore. Campaign finance irregularities. Unreported gifts. Conflicts of interest. Enough to warrant a state-level probe. When the story broke 2 weeks later, it was a wildfire. Rourke resigned in disgrace. More headlines. More heat. And Diane? She could no longer step outside without cameras snapping or neighbors whispering. The invitations stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. Her charity emails bounced back unread. She was radioactive. I maintained my routine throughout. Morning walks. Weekly lunches at the club. Evening drinks with old colleagues. When asked, I offered a simple line. I wish Diane well. I trust the process will reveal the truth. I never smiled when I said it. But inside, I burned with cold satisfaction. One morning, as summer edged into July, I came downstairs to find Diane packing a suitcase in the foyer. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Running already? I asked. She froze, shoulders trembling. I can't stay here, she whispered. I can't walk down the street. I can't show my face. I nodded slowly. You built your castle on sand, I said. Now the tide's come in. She turned, tears streaking her hollow cheeks. I loved you once, she said desperately. You could have. This didn't have to. I cut her off with a single, sharp glance. That woman, I said coldly, died a long time ago. Without another word, I stepped aside. She left. I watched her drive away without a flicker of emotion. But I wasn't finished. There was one final move to make. One last thread to pull that would ensure Diane's fall wasn't temporary. That would leave her trapped in the rubble of her own making, unable to rebuild. And that move? It was already in motion. When you build something, a house, a marriage, a life, you learn a simple truth. The final blow doesn't have to be the biggest. It just has to be placed right. In the load-bearing beam. In the keystone. Strike there, and everything else collapses under its own weight. Diane thought leaving would spare her that last hit. She was wrong. After she drove away that morning, 2 battered suitcases in the back of her silver BMW, I didn't feel relief, or sadness, or victory. I felt nothing. The house was still, quiet, exactly the way I wanted it. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and walked my usual circuit through the property, past the rose garden, down the gravel path by the old stone wall, back around to the terrace where Diane once hosted her saccharine garden parties. Gone now. All of it. And soon, her. But not yet. The final phase had already begun. A week earlier, while Diane was still clawing at what remained of her charity, I'd contacted an old client, Gerald Lansing, corporate lawyer, big player in local real estate circles. We'd worked together on a couple civic projects years back. More importantly, Gerald sat on the advisory board for the State Ethics Consortium, the same body that approved legal credentials for lobbyists and consultants across the state. Over lunch at the club, seared tuna, Gerald's choice, I'd slid a folder across the table. Inside, a curated collection of Diane's worst sins. Not just the public headlines, those were child's play, but the buried ones. Emails, expense reports, witness statements. Ties to shadowy developers with rap sheets. Conflicts of interest wrapped in layers of glossy PR. Gerald had whistled low as he flipped through the pages. Jesus, he muttered. You sure you want to go nuclear? I sipped my bourbon. Let the pause hang. Yes, I said. Gerald looked at me, eyes sharp. You always were a cold bastard, Callahan. I smiled thinly. Not always, I replied. But some lessons stick. He closed the folder, slipped it into his briefcase. I'll see what strings I can pull, he said. No promises. I'm not asking for promises, I said. Just gravity. 2 days after Diane left, Gerald called. It's done, he said. Her name's been flagged. Meaning, she won't be able to register as a legal consultant. Not in this state. Possibly not in others, once the word spreads. Good, I said. She'll fight it, he added. I expect she will, I said. But the foundations are already cracked. That was one thread. The next involved the IRS investigation, which was progressing beautifully. Thanks to a well-timed anonymous tip, crafted and sent by yours truly, they now had cause to dig deeper. A second audit was opened, this time into Diane's personal finances. Offshore accounts, undeclared gifts, lavish personal expenses run through the charity's books. The agents were sharks now, scenting blood. And Diane? She was floundering. I watched from a distance as her life unraveled. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her attorney withdrew representation after a quiet ethics complaint, again, anonymously sourced. Even her family, those smug old money in-laws who once looked down on me as the architect who married up, distanced themselves. At the club, I overheard whispers. Did you see the Chronicle update? She's finished. Shame. She was always such a force. I never corrected them, never added a word. I simply ordered my drink, tipped well, and left them to their stories. But the true checkmate was still to come. Diane's last hope, her last fantasy, was that she could flee, rebuild, start fresh somewhere else. California, maybe. Or Europe. A new name, a new charity, a new stage. I couldn't let that happen. And so, I activated the final lever. It involved a simple concept, professional blacklisting. Through quiet calls and subtle channels, I ensured that Diane's reputation would follow her like a shadow. I spoke with old colleagues in architecture and urban planning, many of whom served on boards or advised grant foundations. I shared documents. Carefully, discreetly. No explicit defamation. Just information. enough to ensure that any future Diane Callahan project would be greeted with skepticism, with hesitation, with risk. Meanwhile, Miles published a final piece, a brutal postmortem of the scandal, complete with timelines, financial breakdowns, and damning quotes from former charity board members. The headline was a dagger. From Saint to Scandal, The Rise and Fall of Diane Callahan. Subhead, a cautionary tale of power, greed, and betrayal. It trended for days. And Diane? She was nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled. Some said she'd gone to a cousin's estate in Vermont. Others whispered about rehab clinics. I didn't care. Her physical location meant nothing. Her legacy was ash. Then, one rainy afternoon, 2 weeks after the final article dropped, an envelope arrived at the house. No return address. Inside, a letter, written in Diane's trembling hand. Michael, I know you'll likely burn this without reading, but I need to try. You've won. I see that now. Every door is closed. Every ally gone. I can't even open a new bank account without red flags. I was wrong. About everything. About Vince. About the charity. About us. I thought I was building something greater. I was blind. You once said I'd wear my choices like a scar. I do. Every day. Please. If there is any mercy left in you, let me start over. Somewhere. Anywhere. I beg you. Diane. I read it twice. Folded it carefully. Set it in the fireplace. And watched it burn. No reply. No mercy. Not because I hated her, but because she needed to understand, deep in her marrow, that actions have consequences. And some bridges, once burned, are never rebuilt. The next morning, I rose at dawn. Shaved. Dressed. Took my usual walk. The town was quieter now. Less bright. But somehow more honest. At the club, old friends nodded to me with newfound respect. You handled it like a surgeon, Gerald said one afternoon. I offered a thin smile. It was just architecture, I replied. Find the weak points. Apply pressure. Let gravity do the rest. He laughed. You should write a book. Maybe one day, I said. But in truth, there was only one audience I'd needed. And she'd heard the lesson loud and clear. People think revenge ends with a bang. Some kind of grand finale, fireworks, applause, maybe a tearful confession or a dramatic fall from grace. But real revenge? The good kind? It ends in silence. In the way someone avoids a mirror. In the way their voice changes when they say their own name. It ends not when the world turns on them, but when they start to. I was counting on that. Diane's fall hadn't been fast. It had been deliberate. Designed. Every crack widened by hand. Every support beam removed just slow enough to make her watch the ceiling sag. And now, standing among the rubble of what used to be her life, she still didn't understand the most important part. I wasn't done. Because see, there's another kind of scar. The one you leave behind after everything's already broken. The kind you stitch into someone's future. And Diane? She still had one more future to lose. After the final article came out, and the letter arrived, the one I burned without blinking, she vanished from public view entirely. No interviews. No rebuttals. Just silence. Her lawyer, the third one she tried since the first two dropped her mid-inquiry, put out a limp statement about her, refocusing on private health matters, and stepping away from public life. But I knew Diane better than her PR team. She wasn't retreating. She was waiting. Diane wasn't a woman who gave up, she adapted. Reinvented. She thought this would all blow over in a year or two. That people would forget. That she'd change her hair, write a memoir, move to a different state, and climb her way back. So I made sure she couldn't. It started with the nonprofit watchdogs. Quiet tip-offs to small but dedicated investigative blogs that focused on misuse of funds in charity organizations. I gave them copies of documents I'd held in reserve, duplicate donation receipts, bank transfers under fake project names, expenses billed from out-of-state vendors who didn't exist. Enough to get Diane's charity blacklisted from every legitimate grant body on the Eastern Seaboard. Then I moved to the professional circles. Sent anonymous dossiers to the Rotary Club, the League of Women Civic Leaders, a few Ivy League alumni committees where Diane had once been a keynote darling. They didn't respond. They just quietly deleted her from their directories, removed her headshot, canceled her speaking slots. And then came the book deal. I knew about it before Diane did. A small independent publishing house, one of those high-minded imprints that put out glossy memoirs by disgraced politicians and socialites reclaiming their narrative. They'd floated a feeler to her, interested in a redemption story. Woman of power brought low. Tears. Growth. The usual trash. I reached out to an editor I knew from years ago, someone who owed me a favor after I helped her father keep his license during a zoning debacle. All I said was, "You're about to publish a fraud. I can prove it." The offer disappeared within 3 days. When I checked the publisher's site the following week, Diane's name was gone. She never mentioned it to me. But I saw the look on her face in the one paparazzi photo that surfaced weeks later, sunken cheeks, wide sunglasses, walking out of a CVS with a plastic bag of antidepressants and boxed wine. I saw it in her shoulders, in the way her mouth hung open like she'd forgotten how to keep it shut. She knew. I was still out there, still pressing, still watching. And that's when I began the last stage, the one I'd waited months for. The Foundation Awards Committee. Diane's greatest achievement, the one legacy she thought was still untouchable, was her role in founding the Callahan Civic Endowment, a city-administered fund created in both our names 20 years ago, when we were still something resembling a team. I had helped her build it, structured the bylaws, tied it legally to our estate so that it couldn't be tampered with. But there was a clause Diane never read. I added it quietly, buried it deep in the trust revision after her first charity scandal years back. The clause said, in the event that either founder is found to have committed acts of civic fraud or unethical conduct in the course of charitable administration, their name shall be stricken from all official materials related to the endowment. It was legal. It was ironclad. And now, it was time to use it. I submitted the motion to the City Fund Committee along with certified court records from the IRS and council hearings. I didn't even have to show up. The paperwork spoke for itself. A month later, a letter arrived. Mr. Callahan, we regret the circumstances that have led to this decision, but in accordance with the binding clause under Article 14C of the founding documents, the committee has voted unanimously to remove Diane Callahan's name from the Civic Endowment's branding, press materials, and public references. As such, the fund will now be titled the Michael Callahan Civic Endowment. Thank you for your continued service to the city. Warm regards. Charlene B. Tucker, Chairwoman, City Endowment Oversight Committee. I read the letter in full, twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the center of the dining table, right where Diane used to sit, in that high-backed white chair she insisted matched her aesthetic. That chair is gone now. So is she. But her name being erased? That was the real funeral. She didn't write after that. Didn't call. I imagine she got the letter around the same time I did. Probably read it in some dusty guest room in Vermont or upstate New York, sitting on a bed that wasn't hers, surrounded by bags she'd never finish unpacking. I could see it so clearly in my mind. The moment her eyes hit that line, the Michael Callahan Civic Endowment, and she realized her name, her legacy, her final piece of permanence had been wiped clean. There would be no books, no new cities, no fresh starts, only silence. And her, alone with it. The best kind of revenge doesn't announce itself. It lingers. It grows in the quiet places of a person's life, filling the cracks they thought were invisible, spreading, poisoning, becoming part of them. That's what Diane has now. Not disgrace, not ruin, not even hatred. Just the knowledge that I built her fall like I built everything else, methodically, with clean lines, tight seams, and perfect balance. No mess, no traces, no recovery, just me, and a life no longer infected by her presence. Summer in this town always brought a kind of lazy warmth, the kind that seeps into brick and bone. The trees hung heavy, their branches swollen with leaves. The courthouse lawn glistened with the kind of artificial green you get from too much pride and too little shame. It was perfect. The perfect setting for an ending. You see, real endings don't happen in the headlines. The public thinks they do. They see the splashy story, the scandalous photo, the resignation letter with all its legal padding and hollow regret. But that's just the first act. The real ending happens later, after the cameras pack up, when the air grows thick with what isn't said. When the one who fell wakes up every day and remembers exactly what they've lost again and again and again. That's what I wanted for Diane. Not a public spectacle. Not pity. Just permanence. And now, I had it. It had been 3 weeks since the Civic Endowment officially stripped her name. The new plaques were already being etched, the website scrubbed, the archives updated. My name, and mine alone, now stood in bronze and in print where hers used to be. A quiet shift, but a final one. The type of shift that echoed louder in her mind than any headline ever could. I hadn't heard from her since. No more letters. No calls. No desperate visits. Some part of her must have realized what that letter on the dining table meant. That there was no appeal, no reversal, no backdoor redemption left. But I wasn't finished yet. One last stone remained unturned, one that would ensure her exile wasn't temporary. It was about Rourke. See, Vince Rourke's fall had been swift. After the state ethics probe dug into his finances, it uncovered more than even I'd expected: unreported foreign accounts, kickbacks from out-of-state developers, gifts disguised as consulting fees. He'd resigned, of course, but quietly. No grand speech. No chest-thumping. Just a thin, one-page statement about spending more time with family, the boilerplate language of a man cornered and bleeding. But Rourke was dangerous. Not because he was smart, he wasn't, but because he was petty. And men like that, when they lose their power, tend to look for someone to blame. Someone close. Someone who'd made them feel invincible, only to leave them exposed. Someone like Diane. Through my channels, a retired council aide with a taste for good whiskey, I learned that Rourke was already talking. Not to the press yet. Not officially. But in whispers. At bars. Over cigars with old allies who'd now disowned him. He was laying the groundwork for a new narrative. It wasn't me. It was her. Diane manipulated me. Diane promised protection. Diane told me it was safe. Typical coward's play. Shift the target. Minimize his own role. And I let him. No interference. No warnings. Because the truth was, Rourke couldn't hurt me. Not anymore. My name was clean. My role in the endowment and my years of civic work insulated me. I was untouchable. But Diane? She was exposed. And watching Rourke turn on her, watching her final would-be ally tear at her like a wounded dog, would be the last twist of the knife. And so, I waited. It didn't take long. The Chronicle ran a short column first, buried below the fold, nothing dramatic. Sources close to the former council president suggest that key decisions were influenced by prominent charity leaders. No names. But everyone knew. The blogs picked it up next, the same watchdogs I'd fed weeks earlier. Their pieces were less polite. They named names. They dredged up emails. One even posted screenshots of texts between Diane and Rourke, clumsy, desperate exchanges about keeping the project approvals moving and quietly securing donor support. I had copies of those texts myself. I'd provided them, of course. By the end of that week, Diane's final defenders, the last scattered friends and distant relatives clinging to some hope of her innocence, fell silent. Her name was radioactive now, beyond public salvage, beyond the reach of even the slickest PR firm. And the best part? She knew. How did I know? Because I saw her. Not directly, not face to face. I had no desire for that. But one crisp morning, while walking through the square on my way to the club, I spotted her across the street, sitting alone on a wrought iron bench beneath the old courthouse clock. No makeup, no designer clothes, just a faded cardigan and worn jeans, hair pulled back with a crooked clip, a to-go coffee cup shaking slightly in her hand. She looked small. I stopped beneath a tree and watched, unseen. She wasn't crying, not openly, but her eyes, they were empty. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from sadness or fear. The kind that comes from understanding, in your bones, that you've been erased. I let her sit there. Let her feel it. Then I turned and continued on. At the club that afternoon, Gerald joined me at my usual table. "It's over," he said simply, folding the Chronicle in front of me. Rourke's latest disgrace occupied half the page now. Diane's name, bold as brass, peppered throughout. I sipped my scotch. "It was over the moment she lied to me," I said. "Everything since then? Just architecture." Gerald chuckled. "You're a cold son of a bitch, Callahan." I smiled thinly. "Not cold," I replied. "Precise." And that was the truth. Every move I'd made had been deliberate. Every piece laid with care. Not out of rage. Not out of hatred. Out of necessity. Because some structures, once compromised, must be demolished completely. Not to punish. Not even to prove a point. But to ensure they can never be rebuilt. Diane's life was that kind of structure. And now, all that remained was dust. In the weeks that followed, the town moved on. Another scandal took the headlines. Another politician fell. Another gala was planned, one I attended without fanfare, sipping my drink beneath the new endowment plaque bearing only my name. People asked after Diane, of course. "Have you heard from her? Do you know where she went?" Such a shame. I always answered the same way. "No idea," I'd say calmly. "I hope she finds peace." And in a way, I meant it. Not because I forgave her. I didn't. Not because I wanted her happy. I didn't. But because peace, in Diane's world now, was the only thing that would remind her of what she'd lost. The only thing that would echo in the quiet spaces of her life where applause used to be. That's the real revenge. Not the headlines. Not the scandal. The silence. The scar. And me? I live well in silence. Always have. Always will. The end. Subscribe to the channel